The room fell quiet the moment the lights flickered above their heads, and both Keanu and Sandra felt the shift in the air as if the world wanted them to pause. The film crew had prepared a warm, documentary-style setup inside an old theater hall, and the soft glow of the studio lamps created a gentle atmosphere around the large wooden stage. Everything felt calm until the sudden blackout turned the entire place into a dim, uncertain space where only the faint emergency lights remained. Keanu looked up with steady eyes while Sandra pressed her hand against the chair beside her, feeling the silence deepen around them. The moment was strange yet peaceful, and something about it felt like a beginning rather than an interruption. The crew rushed outside to check the power issue, and the two actors were left alone in the half-lit hall. The stillness wrapped around them like a quiet blanket, inviting them to speak without any pressure from cameras or schedules. Keanu sat on the edge of the stage with a thoughtful posture, while Sandra moved slowly across the room searching for backup candles. She found a small box near the equipment shelf and placed a few candles on the floor before lighting them with careful hands. The warm glow spread across their faces and created a soft halo around them that made the moment feel almost sacred. Keanu thanked her gently, and she smiled with a calm expression that showed both curiosity and comfort. They had known each other for many years, yet moments like this were rare, because life often placed them in fast-paced environments where silence never stayed long. Now that everything had stopped, they could finally breathe without the noise of expectations. The stage looked different in the candlelight, and the old wooden seats cast long shadows across the hall, creating an atmosphere filled with gentle suspense. Neither of them knew why the blackout happened, but both sensed something meaningful hidden inside the pause. Sandra sat down beside Keanu and rested her hands on her knees while trying to understand the weight she felt in that moment. She spoke softly about how life often pushed people to move faster than their hearts could handle, and how silence sometimes revealed truths that noise always covered. Keanu listened with sincere attention, as if her words carried a deeper meaning beyond casual reflection. He admitted that he sometimes wondered whether people really saw him as he was or only as the version they expected. The sincerity in his voice surprised even himself, because he rarely opened up so easily. Sandra felt the softness of his honesty and nodded with warm understanding. The tension grew when they heard something fall in the hallway outside the stage. Both froze for a second because the sound came out of nowhere and echoed through the silent building with a sharp metallic tone. Keanu stood up slowly with steady awareness while Sandra followed close behind him. They walked toward the doorway, trying to understand the source of the noise without letting fear control them. When they stepped into the hallway, they saw a stack of lighting stands collapsed onto the floor, possibly due to the earlier power surge. Nothing dangerous was present, but the moment added a sudden ripple of suspense that made the environment feel alive and unpredictable. They returned to the stage and sat closer to the candlelight, as if the darkness around them wanted them to stay near each other. The air felt heavy with unspoken thoughts, and the unexpected quietness made their emotions sharper. Sandra took a deep breath and decided to share something she rarely confessed. She said she sometimes questioned whether she had made the right choices during moments when life felt overwhelming. Keanu absorbed her words carefully and replied with gentle truth. He said he understood that feeling because he also carried doubts that he never voiced. In that quiet hall, their reflections flowed naturally and created a sense of trust that needed no explanation. Each candle flame flickered softly as they spoke, and the shadows moved gently across the walls like silent reminders that moments like these were temporary yet powerful. Keanu looked at Sandra and felt grateful for the openness she offered, because it allowed him to lower the heavy guard he always carried. She felt the same gratitude because his calm presence always made uncertainty feel lighter. Neither knew how long the blackout would last, but both understood that this rare pause was giving them something they had never planned yet deeply needed. The hall felt warmer now, and the suspense turned into a gentle pull toward deeper understanding. Sandra asked him what he thought people truly needed to feel balanced in life. He replied with slow reflection, saying people needed moments where they could be real without fear. She felt his words reach a part of her heart that had long remained protected, and she thanked him with quiet sincerity. The emotional connection between them grew stronger as they continued sharing small stories and honest thoughts while the candles burned steadily. They felt as if the world outside had stopped moving and only this small circle of light existed. Their conversation drifted naturally between memories and present concerns, yet every moment carried a sense of mutual respect. The rising tension from the blackout and the earlier noise made everything feel slightly mysterious, as if something unseen guided their reflections toward a deeper purpose. They both sensed that this night was leading them somewhere unexpected. As the minutes passed, they realized that this unplanned silence was more meaningful than the documentary they had come to film. The cameras were off, the crew was gone, and there was no pressure to perform. Only two people remained inside an old theater sharing thoughts they never planned to speak. The emotional depth of their connection grew stronger with each passing moment, and they finally understood that the blackout was not an interruption but an invitation. They looked at the quiet hall around them and felt a peaceful heaviness in their hearts. The atmosphere was soft yet charged with something they could not define. Sandra took a gentle breath and asked him a simple question that felt heavier than anything else she had said tonight. She asked what he believed truly defined a meaningful life. Before he answered, the emergency light above them flickered again, as if reminding them that time was moving. Keanu opened his mouth to respond, but then a distant sound echoed from deeper inside the building. The new sound was different from the earlier collapse. It was softer yet sharper in meaning, and it carried a tone that hinted at something unexpected waiting in the shadows. Keanu and Sandra exchanged a glance that held both curiosity and suspense because they suddenly felt the story of the night beginning again in a new direction. The distant sound moved through the quiet building like a slow whisper, and Keanu felt a small shift in the atmosphere as if the hall itself was reacting to something unseen. Sandra looked toward the far corridor with calm curiosity rather than fear because something about the moment felt more mysterious than threatening. The candles flickered lightly, as if responding to the soft disturbance, and their warm circles of light made the darkness outside the stage look deeper and more uncertain. Keanu stood up again with gentle steadiness, and Sandra joined him with a calm expression that carried trust rather than worry. They walked a few steps toward the hallway, but stopped when they reached the edge of the stage because the darkness beyond felt like a veil hiding something meaningful rather than dangerous. Sandra exhaled slowly and said they should wait for a moment before stepping outside the warm light. Keanu agreed with a thoughtful nod and eased himself back onto the stage floor. She followed and sat close enough for their candle-lit silhouettes to blend softly together. The earlier tension returned, but it carried a new emotional weight that pulled them deeper into reflection. Sandra whispered that sometimes unexpected pauses showed people what they usually ignored, and her voice held a fragile honesty that made Keanu look at her with quiet admiration. He told her that silence revealed far more than noise ever could because it showed the true shape of a person's thoughts. The moment felt gentle and sincere, and both understood that they were stepping into a deeper emotional space without even trying. The blackout no longer felt like a disruption. It felt like an invitation to explore parts of themselves they rarely visited. Keanu leaned back slightly and looked at the candles as he spoke about the strange pressure of always appearing calm, even during moments when his heart felt heavy. Sandra listened closely, feeling moved by his openness because she knew he rarely allowed himself to appear vulnerable. She replied softly that people admired his strength not because he hid his emotions, but because he carried them with grace. Her words touched something deep within him, and he felt a warmth that was both comforting and humbling. He thanked her in a quiet tone that matched the solemn beauty of the moment. The sound from the corridor returned, softer this time, almost like something shifting slowly against the floor. Neither moved because there was no fear in their hearts, only rising curiosity. Keanu joked lightly that the old building seemed to have its own personality, and Sandra smiled with gentle amusement. The humor eased the tension for a moment, but also made the silence feel even more meaningful. There was a strange balance between calm reflection and lingering suspense that wrapped them in a soft emotional tension. Sandra began sharing a memory about a moment when she felt completely lost early in her career. She described how she doubted her talent and questioned whether she was meant to continue on the path she had chosen. The hall around them felt like it leaned closer as she spoke because her words carried years of quiet pain mixed with resilience. Keanu listened without interrupting because he understood the fragile strength beneath her voice. When she paused, he told her that every moment of doubt shaped the gentle courage she carried today. The sincerity in his tone made her heart soften. The candles burned lower as they spoke, and their shadows stretched across the wooden floor like silent witnesses to their reflections. The soft glow created a peaceful space where truths felt easier to share. Keanu admitted that he sometimes wondered whether people misunderstood his silence because they expected dramatic expressions instead of quiet thoughtfulness. Sandra responded with steady confidence, saying his silence was a gift because it made people slow down and listen. He appreciated her insight and felt a quiet gratitude for her presence beside him. The stillness in the hall shifted again when a faint click echoed from deeper inside the building. It was a delicate sound like a door easing open somewhere far away. Sandra turned her head with a calm, thoughtful expression, and Keanu sensed that the moment carried something symbolic rather than threatening. The blackout had created a maze of shadows inside the building, and every small sound felt like a clue guiding them toward something meaningful. The air held a mix of suspense and serenity that neither wanted to escape. They settled back into the warm candlelight and continued their quiet reflections. Sandra touched the edge of one candle and spoke about how life often taught lessons in unexpected ways. She said the blackout reminded her that people learned the most about themselves when the world removed its usual distractions. Keanu agreed and added that genuine connection often emerged in moments when no one planned anything. The softness in his tone made the atmosphere feel even warmer. For a while they spoke about small memories that shaped their resilience. Sandra described her gratitude for moments when kindness changed her direction without her noticing at first. Keanu shared how humility had guided him through years when life felt heavy. Their voices blended gently with the quiet hum of the emergency lights above. The deep emotional connection between them grew stronger as they continued speaking freely without concern for cameras or expectations. The rising conflict returned when the building's ventilation system made a low rumbling sound that echoed across the hall like a distant storm. The candles flickered sharply, and the shadows trembled across the walls. Sandra placed her hand on the floor to steady herself and felt the vibration under her palm. Keanu scanned the room with quiet alertness, and then relaxed when the sound faded just as quickly. He said the system was probably restarting after the surge, but the sudden noise added a new wave of suspense around them. They both took a calming breath and allowed the silence to settle again. The moment felt heavier now because the mix of emotions was becoming richer and more layered. The suspense of the blackout blended with the emotional openness of their conversation and created a space where every second felt important. Sandra looked at him with soft eyes and said she was grateful for this pause because it allowed them to speak from a place of truth rather than habit. Keanu felt that same gratitude and said people often needed unexpected moments to slow down and see each other with clarity. The twist came when the emergency light above them flickered so sharply that the hall went dark for a full heartbeat. During that brief moment of darkness, they heard a sharp thump from the deepest corner of the building. When the light returned, their hearts beat faster from the shock of the sudden sound. Sandra leaned closer and whispered that they should not ignore whatever was happening inside the hall. Keanu nodded with steady seriousness and understood that the night was guiding them somewhere they were not expecting. The emotional beat arrived when Sandra placed her hand gently over Keanu's hand in a gesture of reassurance. She told him that no matter what they discovered tonight, she trusted his calm presence. Keanu felt a warm surge of gratitude and covered her hand with his own as a quiet promise of support. They both felt strengthened by the silent exchange of kindness and respect. As the candles continued burning lower, Keanu stood up and offered his hand to help Sandra rise. She accepted, and the two stepped toward the hallway with slow, steady steps. They moved together as if following a quiet call from the shadows. The hall stretched before them in dim, soft light, and the suspense grew stronger with each breath. What they found next would change the direction of their night in a way they never imagined. The hallway felt colder as Keanu and Sandra stepped beyond the warm circle of candlelight, and the echo of their footsteps moved softly through the long corridor like a gentle warning. The emergency lights cast thin beams across the walls, creating uneven shadows that shifted each time they walked. Sandra held her breath for a moment because something about the atmosphere felt strangely expectant, as if the building was holding a secret it wanted them to discover. Keanu walked slightly ahead, yet kept his pace slow enough for her to remain close beside him, and the silence between them grew deep and focused. As they reached the center of the hallway, they saw a faint glow leaking from a half-open doorway on their right. It was not bright enough to be a working light, yet too steady to be a reflection. Sandra whispered that the glow looked unnatural for a blackout, and Keanu agreed with soft concern. They moved toward the door carefully and listened for any sound from inside the room. There was nothing at first, then a delicate clicking noise surfaced like a small mechanism trying to restart. The sound was gentle, yet perfectly timed, making it feel intentional rather than random. Keanu pushed the door open slowly, and both stepped into a small storage room filled with old equipment boxes and unused props. The glow they saw came from a tiny battery-powered monitor placed on a shelf near the back wall. The monitor flickered softly with an unstable light, as if struggling to stay alive. The image on the screen was unclear because the signal was weak, but they could see shapes moving slowly across a grainy background. Sandra felt a chill move down her spine because she knew no crew member would leave a monitor running during a blackout. Something about the moment felt unexpectedly important. Keanu leaned closer and tapped the side of the monitor, gently causing the image to stabilize for a few seconds. They both stared with growing amazement because the screen showed a live feed of the very hall they had been sitting in earlier. The candlelight still glowed faintly in the center of the frame, and the shadows stretched across the wooden floor. But there was something else, something subtle yet unmistakable. A slow movement appeared in the corner of the screen, like a shadow shifting when no one was there. Sandra gasped softly, and Keanu narrowed his eyes, trying to understand. The image flickered again, and the movement vanished, leaving only the empty hall behind. Sandra placed her hand on the side of the monitor, trying to feel any vibration from the device, but it remained perfectly still. Keanu exhaled slowly and said the monitor might be receiving leftover footage from the backup system. Sandra nodded, but her expression showed deeper concern because she knew backup systems did not create shadows that moved without reason. She wondered if someone else was inside the building, yet the thought did not feel threatening. Instead, it felt like part of a strange puzzle the night wanted them to solve. As they left the storage room, the hallway felt even quieter than before. Keanu suggested they return to the main hall to check if anything had changed since they left. Sandra agreed, though her heart carried a small tremble of curiosity. When they stepped back onto the stage, they noticed that 2 candles had burned out, leaving longer shadows around the space. The gentle darkness made everything feel slightly transformed. Sandra touched the remaining candle and whispered that the glow looked weaker than before. Keanu felt the same sense of increasing tension, as if time itself was urging them forward. They sat together again on the wooden floor, and Sandra asked what he thought the shadow on the monitor meant. Keanu answered with slow thought, saying sometimes unfamiliar moments reveal truths people overlook because routine life makes them blind. His words carried quiet wisdom that made Sandra feel a deep comfort despite the suspense around them. She felt grateful for his calm presence because his steadiness made every uncertainty feel easier to face. Keanu looked at her with a gentle expression that reflected the same trust. The rising conflict returned when a new sound echoed from the balcony seats above them. It was a soft, dragging noise like something sliding across the wooden railing with careful pressure. Sandra looked upward while Keanu shifted his posture with calm alertness. He asked her to stay close as they moved toward the front of the stage to get a better view of the balcony area. The emergency lights cast only the faintest glow upward, and they could see nothing clearly. However, they felt a subtle presence in the air, a sense that something or someone was near, though not visible. Keanu walked up the side stairs leading to the balcony while Sandra followed close behind. Each step made a soft creak beneath their feet, adding depth to the suspense. When they reached the top, they found no one there, only rows of empty seats staring downward at the stage. Sandra exhaled slowly, relieved yet confused. Keanu walked along the aisle, touching the railing where the sound had come from earlier. He found nothing unusual except for a small object placed at the end of the row. It was a folded cloth resting gently on the seat. He picked it up carefully and felt its texture between his fingers. The cloth was old but clean and carried no markings. Sandra watched him with curiosity as he unfolded it, slowly revealing nothing inside. The cloth was empty yet placed with clear intention. She wondered aloud whether someone had left it there to guide them. Keanu considered her words and agreed that it felt symbolic, though he could not explain why. They decided to carry the cloth with them because it felt like a piece of the puzzle waiting for meaning. Twist arrived when they descended the balcony stairs and returned to the stage. The moment they stepped back onto the wooden floor, the remaining candle flame shot upward with sudden strength, as if reacting to their presence. The flame grew brighter for a brief second, then settled again, leaving the hall in a strange, quiet glow. Sandra touched Keenan's arm and whispered that the room felt different now, almost aware of them. He nodded because he felt the same unusual energy spreading through the air like a gentle pulse. They sat again, and Sandra spoke with deep emotion about how rare moments like this revealed the truth behind people's fears and hopes. She said life often pushed them forward so quickly that they forgot to notice when something meaningful tried to reach them. Keanu agreed, saying real wisdom often appeared during moments when people were forced to slow down and listen. The emotional beat softened the tension and reminded them why the night felt so important. Their words carried a sincerity that made the shadows around them feel warmer and less intimidating. As they reflected gently, the emergency light above flickered once more, casting a ripple of dimness across the hall. The atmosphere shifted again, and a new quiet formed around them. They sensed the night entering another unexpected phase, and both prepared themselves with calm hearts. Keanu held the folded cloth in his hands, wondering what role it would play in the unfolding mystery. Sandra looked at the darkened corners of the hall and felt the gentle pull of something calling them deeper into understanding. They did not know what waited in the next moment, but both felt ready to face it together. The night was no longer only a blackout. It had become a journey towards something hidden and possibly beautiful. The hall grew quieter after the emergency light flickered, and Keanu felt the silence settle around them like a curtain slowly lowering. The folded cloth rested gently in his hands, carrying an odd sense of meaning he could not understand yet. Sandra watched him with calm curiosity, sensing that the object was not random. The air around them felt heavier now, as if the theater itself wanted them to look deeper into something hidden beneath the surface of the night. Each small sound in the building carried weight and intention. Sandra suggested they examine the cloth under closer light, so Keanu lifted it toward the nearest emergency bulb. The fabric changed slightly under the glow, revealing faint creases shaped by years of folding. There were no symbols or markings, yet the cloth felt strangely familiar to both of them. Sandra frowned softly and said it reminded her of something theaters once used during quiet rehearsals, though she could not place the memory. Keanu studied the texture carefully and agreed it carried a history deeper than its simple appearance. The moment grew tense when a new sound echoed through the hall. It came from the stage door at the far left corner, a slow creaking that suggested someone was opening it from the inside. Sandra stood quickly yet kept her expression calm. Keanu rose beside her with steady alertness, prepared for whatever waited behind the door. The creaking continued until the door opened about halfway, revealing nothing but darkness behind it. Sandra felt her heart race for a moment, yet she remained composed because something about the night had begun to feel purposeful rather than threatening. Keanu stepped toward the door with slow, measured steps while Sandra remained close behind. When they reached the doorway, he pushed it open gently and looked inside. The room beyond was small and filled with unused props covered in white sheets. Dust particles floated through the air like tiny sparks in the faint emergency light. Something about the stillness inside the room felt preserved, as if no one had entered it for many years. Sandra whispered that the room felt untouched, and Keanu nodded with thoughtful agreement. They stepped inside with careful movements and scanned the space for anything unusual. The props appeared ordinary, yet the atmosphere carried a strange emotional weight. Keanu placed the folded cloth on a covered box as they explored the corners of the room. Sandra reached toward a small shelf holding several old stage items and found a wooden frame lying face down. She picked it up gently and turned it over. The frame held no picture, only a blank faded backing that suggested something had been removed long ago. Keanu joined her and studied the frame with quiet interest. He noticed faint markings along the edges where an old photo once rested. Sandra touched the wooden surface lightly and said the room felt like a forgotten memory waiting to be uncovered. Keanu agreed, but reminded her that they should not force meaning into every detail. Still, the room carried a story within its silence, and both felt drawn to understand why it called them tonight. The rising conflict returned when they heard footsteps just outside the stage door. The sound was slow, steady, and unmistakable. Sandra turned instantly toward the door with wide, focused eyes. Keanu stepped in front of her with protective calm while listening carefully. The footsteps moved past the threshold, then stopped completely as if whoever was walking paused right outside the room. The silence that followed was deeper than before, carrying a tension that tightened the air around them. Keanu took a quiet breath and whispered that they should approach carefully. Sandra nodded and stayed close to him as they walked back toward the doorway. When they looked outside, there was no one standing there and the hallway was completely empty. The silence felt thick like a blanket hiding something just beyond their sight. Sandra felt a small chill run across her arms, yet she stayed composed because her trust in Keanu outweighed her fear. He placed his hand gently on her arm as reassurance, before stepping fully into the hallway again. The emotional beat came when Sandra spoke softly about how strange it felt to fear the unknown yet feel comfort beside someone she trusted. Keanu listened with warm sincerity and said her presence made the uncertainty easier for him too. Their eyes met with quiet understanding, and the bond between them deepened with a gentle emotional pull. The night was teaching them something about vulnerability and trust, something they rarely explored so openly. As they returned to the stage, they noticed a new detail that had changed in their absence. The remaining candle on the wooden floor was now burned nearly to the base, leaving only a small flickering flame barely holding on. Sandra crouched beside it and felt a wave of emotion at the sight. She said the candle felt symbolic, like time was guiding them toward something important before the night ended. Keanu looked at the flame and sensed the same metaphor. He understood that the blackout was more than a technical issue. It had become a quiet space for truth and wisdom to appear. The twist arrived when Keanu lifted the folded cloth again and noticed something hidden inside the final curve of the fabric. A thin piece of paper rested between the layers, though it was not a note or written message. It was a torn corner of an old theater program with no text besides the faded edge of a decorative border. Sandra leaned closer and felt a strange familiarity in the pattern, though she could not identify it. Keanu studied it with careful focus and realized the border matched the design of the theater's opening night program many years ago. They both understood that the cloth and the torn piece were connected to this building's past. Sandra whispered that someone must have placed the items around the theater on purpose, though she could not imagine why. Keanu felt the same curiosity mixed with gentle suspense. He believed the objects were guiding them toward a story they had not yet uncovered. The tension around them grew deeper, yet remained wrapped in a calm, emotional tone. As they sat again in the warm candlelight, Sandra spoke about how life often revealed meaning in quiet, unexpected ways. She said the night reminded her that people learn the most about themselves when the world forces them to slow down and pay attention. Keanu nodded and said wisdom was often hidden in moments that seemed small or confusing at first. Their conversation softened the tension and allowed them to appreciate the beauty inside the mystery. Yet as the candle flame weakened, the hall grew dimmer, and a new wave of suspense settled around them. The emergency light flickered again with a harsh stutter, and the shadows stretched across the floor like long-reaching hands. Sandra felt an instinctive pull to stand and look toward the far left corner of the hall. Keanu noticed her focus and followed her gaze. Something in that corner felt different now, as if the darkness itself was moving. They rose together with slow, steady steps and prepared to walk deeper into the shadows. The night was guiding them again toward another unexpected discovery, and neither wanted to ignore the call. The far left corner of the hall felt heavier than the rest of the room, as if the shadows were layered with quiet meaning that waited for the right moment to reveal itself. Keanu and Sandra walked slowly toward the darkness with careful steps, their eyes adjusting to the dim glow of the weakening emergency light. The candle behind them flickered with an unsteady heartbeat, sending long, trembling shapes across the wooden floor as though the night itself was breathing. Sandra tightened her hands slightly, yet kept her posture calm, because something inside her trusted the path the night was creating. As they moved closer to the corner, they noticed a faint outline of an old wooden crate resting against the wall. The crate looked untouched for many years, covered in dust, except for a single clean streak across the top. Keanu noticed the streak immediately and whispered that someone had recently placed something inside or taken something out. Sandra crouched beside the crate with quiet curiosity and brushed her fingers along the clean line. The wood felt cool and solid, yet held a strange warmth where the streak broke the dust. Keanu knelt beside her and felt the edges of the crate with gentle pressure. It did not appear locked, but the lid was heavy and required both of them to lift it slowly. When they opened it, a faint, dusty scent rose into the air, along with something that felt like a forgotten memory floating back into the present. Sandra leaned closer and saw a small collection of old items arranged carefully inside. There were dried theater tickets folded neatly in a bundle, a few pieces of costume fabric, and a small metal box that seemed newer than the rest. The rising conflict deepened when Keanu reached into the crate and lifted the metal box. The box was cold and weighty, and its surface reflected the dim emergency light with a soft metallic shimmer. Sandra asked gently if he felt safe opening it, and Keanu nodded with calm confidence. He placed the box on the floor and opened it slowly. Inside, they found several small objects wrapped in soft cloth pieces. Each cloth held something different: a button from an old costume, a miniature stage light lends, a paper tag with a faded number written in ink. Sandra touched one of the objects carefully and felt a strange sense of familiarity. She told Keanu that these items seemed like things a stage crew member might collect during years of work. Keanu agreed and said someone must have valued these things enough to preserve them in such a careful way. The idea felt touching rather than frightening. There was no danger in the crate, only the quiet presence of someone's memories arranged with devotion. Still, the question lingered, why were these items placed in a path they were meant to find tonight? They looked deeper into the metal box and noticed one final object wrapped in a thin, dark cloth. Keanu unfolded it slowly and discovered a small, polished key with a faint engraving on its surface. The engraving was worn, but Sandra could make out the shape of a delicate star etched into the metal. She whispered that the key looked symbolic, possibly connected to a specific room or cabinet inside the theater. Keanu examined the engraving with thoughtful intensity and agreed that the key held purpose. The moment grew emotional when Sandra spoke softly about how the crate felt like a message from someone who once loved this theater deeply. She said the items carried quiet stories that never found a voice. Keanu listened with deep respect and told her that sometimes forgotten objects held the purest truth because they survived without seeking attention. Their words filled the hall with warm sincerity and eased some of the suspense that had wrapped around them since the blackout began. The twist arrived when Keanu stood with the key in his hand and looked toward the back of the hall. He remembered passing a small locked cabinet near the rear entrance when they first walked through the theater earlier in the day. Sandra followed his gaze and felt a sudden clarity. She said the key might belong to that cabinet, and the cabinet might hold the answer to the strange events around them. Keanu felt the same realization and said they should follow the path the night had created. As they walked toward the rear entrance, the atmosphere shifted again. The emergency light flickered with sharper intensity, and the hall grew slightly colder. Sandra could feel the suspense tightening around them, yet she trusted the journey completely. Keanu walked beside her with steady calmness, ready to open whatever truth waited behind the locked door. The candle behind them finally died with a soft sigh, leaving only the faint hall light to guide their steps. When they reached the back of the hall, they found the small cabinet standing silently against the wall. Its metal surface looked aged but solid, and the lock was still intact. Keanu inserted the star-engraved key slowly, and the lock turned with surprising ease. The cabinet door opened wider than expected, revealing a single item placed perfectly in the center of the shelf. The item was a vintage audio recorder with a small tag attached to it. The tag held only one word written, in gentle fading ink reflection. Sandra touched the recorder with careful hands and felt a wave of emotion rise within her chest. There was no fear, only a deep intuitive understanding that this object carried something meaningful for both of them. Keanu lifted the recorder gently and examined its switches and buttons. The device seemed old yet well preserved, as if someone had kept it safe for a long time. Sandra asked if he thought it still worked, and he said there was only one way to know. He pressed the playback button, and the device clicked softly. A quiet static filled the hall for a moment, then a warm voice emerged from the recorder. The voice was gentle, steady, and filled with heartfelt emotion. It belonged to an older woman who spoke with a tone of gratitude and remembrance. She talked about the beauty of the theater, the meaning of honest performance, and the importance of kindness in every act of life. She thanked those who brought light into moments of darkness, and said people discover wisdom during unexpected interruptions. Sandra felt her eyes sting with emotion because the message resonated deeply with everything they had experienced tonight. Keanu listened with focused stillness as the woman continued describing how moments of silence often reveal the truth behind people's hearts. She said the theater survived because of those who treated every corner with respect and filled the space with sincerity. The warmth in her voice wrapped around the hall like a gentle embrace. The emotional beat deepened when the voice on the recorder mentioned something that made both Keanu and Sandra freeze. The woman said she hoped future artists who stepped into the theater would take a moment to reflect on their own journeys and share wisdom with those beside them. She spoke as if she expected them tonight without ever knowing who they would be. Sandra felt tears gather in her eyes as Keanu placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The recording ended with a final message. The woman said that when people find themselves lost in unexpected darkness, they should trust the quiet moments because those moments carry the wisdom that guides them forward. The recorder clicked softly, and the hall fell silent again. Keanu and Sandra stood in the stillness, absorbing the emotional weight of everything they had heard. The cliffhanger arose when the emergency lights shut off for the first time since the blackout began. The theater fell into complete darkness, as if preparing them for the final revelation waiting in the unseen space around them. The darkness that filled the theater felt complete yet strangely gentle, as if the building wanted to remove every distraction for their final moment of understanding. Sandra inhaled slowly, trying to steady herself, while Keanu remained completely still beside her. Without the emergency lights, the hall became a vast, quiet space where sound carried deeper and emotions rose closer to the surface. The recorder rested in Keena's hand, glowing faintly with its tiny red power light, offering the only reminder of the voice that had spoken moments earlier. Sandra whispered that the darkness did not feel threatening. It felt intentional. Keanu agreed in a calm voice, saying the blackout had guided them carefully from the beginning. The theater wanted them to see something beyond the physical world, something hidden in reflection and truth. Their eyes slowly adjusted, and they began to make out faint shapes around them. The rows of seats stretched into soft shadows, and the high ceiling seemed to blend into the night. Despite the mystery surrounding them, they felt grounded in each other's presence. A faint breeze moved through the hall, though no window was open. Sandra felt it brush gently across her face like a quiet invitation. She touched Keena's arm with steady reassurance. He lifted the recorder slightly as if waiting for more sound, but the device remained silent. The message from the older woman still echoed in their minds, repeating her call for reflection, kindness, and shared wisdom. Keanu said her words felt like a gift left intentionally for whoever needed them most. Sandra nodded because she felt the same pull of meaning in her heart. They stepped slowly toward the center of the stage, guided by instinct rather than vision. The wooden floor felt warm beneath their feet, as if absorbing the emotion of the night. When they reached the place where the candle once burned, they paused. Even without the flame, they could sense the lingering warmth of its presence. Sandra closed her eyes and let the silence settle into her chest. Keanu watched her with deep respect because he understood she was absorbing the truth the night had offered. The rising conflict surfaced when another sound echoed through the hall. It was softer than before, almost like a breath released from the walls themselves. The sound carried a tone of gentle sadness and gratitude, as if the theater was saying goodbye to something or someone. Sandra opened her eyes and whispered that the voice on the recorder belonged to a woman who once loved this place deeply. Keanu agreed and said he believed she left the message for anyone willing to truly listen. They stood quietly as the sound faded. The hall felt alive with memory, yet peaceful with acceptance. Sandra spoke with soft emotion, saying the woman seemed to know that future artists would walk through the same shadows she once walked through and find themselves changed by the silence. Keanu replied that her message was a reminder that reflection was not a pause in life, but a path toward clarity. Their voices filled the darkness with warmth rather than fear. The twist came when the recorder clicked again without anyone touching it. A final faint whisper rose from the device. The woman's voice was barely audible, yet filled with comforting sincerity. She said, "Thank you for listening and thank you for seeing me." The recorder then powered off completely, leaving them in pure silence. Sandra held her breath because the words felt personal, as if directed at them specifically. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the emotional depth of the final message. The emotional beat unfolded gently as they stood together on the quiet stage. Sandra placed her hand over her heart and said the night had taught her something simple yet powerful. She said life often hides its most important lessons inside quiet interruptions rather than grand moments. Keanu listened with deep appreciation and shared his own reflection. He said he learned wisdom is not found in answers, but in the courage to pause and feel the truth within oneself. He turned toward Sandra and spoke with sincere respect. He said being beside her during this journey reminded him that kindness grows strongest in shared silence. Sandra felt tears warm her eyes because his words carried a tenderness she did not expect. She told him that his calm presence transformed fear into understanding and confusion into insight. Their connection deepened not through dramatic gestures, but through sincere reflection and unspoken trust. As they stood in the quiet hall, something remarkable occurred. The blackout began to lift. A soft glow appeared high above them, and the overhead lights flickered slowly back to life. The hall brightened inch by inch, revealing the stage again. The warmth of the light felt gentle, not harsh, as if the building understood the importance of the moment. Sandra looked around with wonder because the theater no longer felt mysterious. It felt grateful. Keanu noticed that the crate in the corner remained open. He walked toward it and placed the small metal box back inside with careful respect. Sandra folded the cloth neatly and set it beside the box. Together, they restored the objects gently, as if returning a story to its rightful place. They both felt moved by the responsibility of honoring someone's memories with sincerity. The hall seemed to brighten slightly when they finished, as if acknowledging their kindness. When they stepped toward the exit, the recording device gave one final quiet click, as though acknowledging its last purpose. Keanu placed it inside the cabinet and closed the door. Sandra touched the cabinet lightly and whispered thank you into the silence. The air around them felt calm, peaceful, and complete. They walked toward the main entrance with slower steps, not because they were unsure, but because the night had changed them in a quiet, profound way. The resolution arrived as they reached the doorway and turned back for one last look at the theater. The stage now glowed gently under the restored lights, and the shadows felt lighter than before. Sandra whispered that the night reminded her to listen more deeply to the quiet parts of life. Keanu said the night showed him that wisdom grows when people choose reflection instead of reaction. Their smiles held deep sincerity. Just before they stepped outside, Keanu paused and spoke softly. He said moments like tonight happen only once, but the lessons stay forever. Sandra nodded with full emotion and replied that wisdom becomes real when shared with someone who understands. They walked out of the theater together into the calm night air, carrying with them a new quiet strength shaped by trust, understanding, and the gentle voice of a woman who loved her theater enough to leave a final message of wisdom. The story ended not with answers, but with peace and a deeper connection between two hearts who found clarity inside unexpected darkness. The night had given them what the cameras never could: truth, humility, and the courage to reflect on life together.